Hi, and welcome back to Talking Spartans after a long delay. As you can see, we are not at Spartan Stadium. This is Chris Solari from the Detroit Free Press. I'm joined by LSJ sports columnist Graham Couch. That's the Lansing State Journal. And we just got done at Spartan Stadium watching Michigan State's stunning in some ways. I think probably surprising and shocking 38-27 loss to Rutgers. Season opener, debut for Mel Tucker and Graham. I don't think that there could have been a worse start for Michigan State, maybe than those first four drives, uh, with the exclusion of the one touchdown that they had. They looked rough on offense. They changed defenses and looked rough at the start, and a rough start for Mel Tucker's tenure.
Yeah, it was pretty brutal. I understand why MSU fans are dispirited by it because it looked like kind of the end of the Mark D'Antonio era amplified in some ways in terms of short yardage calls that didn't work, a line that gets pushed back, and the one that was different is the receivers. You definitely saw a little bit of the separation they can get and the improvement there and the talent that they have. But there were a lot of things about it, mostly the 7 turnovers. And there were some undisciplined moments, guys running out of the field late, little, some penalties that were, but the big difference was they turned the ball over, and maybe over time, Rutgers will be more competitive than people think. And so this this loss for Michigan State will age a little bit better. But I think it's one of those things that, in some ways, playing Rutgers out of the gate, if you're where Michigan State is right now as a program, which clearly is a long way to go, is a blessing and a curse, right? It's the blessing because it's an opportunity. It's the curse because if you lose it, there's very little sympathy. And Mel Tucker's honeymoon, which I think you have to give the man time to do the job he was hired to do, which is to develop the roster and recruit it. But if you look on social media, a lot of people are very frustrated. This was sort of the worst case scenario for him.
Yeah, and the people already calling for his head are not living in reality in a lot of ways because, one, Michigan State gave him a lot of money to pry him away from Colorado when they did. Two, they would owe him a significantly larger sum to buy him out anytime in the future. But after one game and 60 minutes of football, and I understand it's
just unfair.
It's lost to Rutgers, and it's a little overblown at some points, particularly when you look at the offseason that they had with getting hired in February, right after signing day. So didn't really have his own class of brain, didn't have spring practice to install that new defense, that 4-2-5 that we saw, that had some moments where it looked good, had some moments where guys looked lost, trying to figure things out. And then to find a quarterback, I mean, there was no chance to find a quarterback until they tried a couple times to have some practices in August. Everything gets shut down, and then they finally geared up at the end of September. So what you're seeing is a month worth of football from a head coach. I mean, he didn't even have an off season. So the perspective there needs to be understood. But 7 turnovers when it's a head coach who's preached ball security, there was a disconnect there. Whether it's a guy like Jaden Reed fumbling the ball away and isn't used to Big Ten defenders yet, whether it's Rocky Lombardi, who I thought, outside of the fumble and the one interception, I think the one interception was a miscommunication with Jaden Reed, or excuse me, with Jalen Naylor early in the game, and that ended up being a problem. And those 2 turnovers resulted in touchdowns for Rutgers. I thought he played otherwise pretty well and put the ball where his guys could make plays. That said, everything amps up even more next week because the talent level rises.
Yeah, no, the Michigan game could be rough. The flip side of that is if they don't turn the ball over 7 times, there are elements of them that I think can compete against a lot of teams in the Big Ten. I think they'll be able to move the ball through the air a little bit against people. The problem now is it'll be interesting to see how teams adjust to this. They look like they cannot run the ball at all. And that offensive line looks like it's just nowhere, like it may have to be completely retooled. I had this sort of thought that maybe, a veteran group, even without Jordan Reed, that was healthy and some younger guys in D'Antonio's later classes that they liked, that maybe this would finally be the group that you saw some progress there, and you just didn't. And so what I think right now people are want Rocky Lombardi beat them a little bit. I think good teams are going to say, this team can't run against us, period. We can also take away some of the passing stuff. And I think that could be a real problem for Michigan State going forward. I do think, the Jaden Reed, I think, despite the 2 turnovers, 11 catches, well over 100 yards, 2 touchdowns. There are a lot of things. The stutter step for 50 yards, the catch in the end zone. There are a lot of things there, giving them a playmaker like that. Jalen Naylor had the play where he spins out of that out route or whatever and goes for the touch. I think there are good things there. The problem they're going to have is that I think they're going to be playing from behind a lot, and they're going to need those guys to be great. And they didn't, Lombardi I thought was okay, but he didn't connect with anything over 20 yards really. And that's going to have to be an element that he's going to have to get better at.
The 2 big passes he had a 30-yard touchdown pass and a 50-yard touchdown pass. A lot of them were catch and runs.
Yeah.
But I think the other thing that comes into play now is people have some tape on what Jaden Reed is. Yeah. And now what are you going to get from Jalen Naylor? There were a couple on that drive where there was the interception. There were basically 2 plays where he and Rocky Lombardi were not on the same page. One, Naylor ran a streak and Lombardi threw the out twice. The second time it got picked. That needs to get cleaned up, in particular because Trey Mosley, he suffered a knee injury. We did not get an update on that. He did not return to the game, and he had to be helped off the field. So that dings your depth. They went in with true freshman Ricky White after that, which, that's a tough spot to put a kid in at that point. But, it was interesting that they went with him, a guy like Larice Nelson I did not see on the non-existent dress list, which would have added some depth. There was a number of guys that haven't even really had a chance to really sift through it because it was a very abnormal kind of day with no fans. We didn't have flip cards. We didn't have depth charts. We didn't have roster. I mean, we had a roster and we basically went through and figured out who was on the field. They dressed 75 and it was a weird environment in some ways. But once back to the pass game, I thought Rocky Lombardi did what he needed to do. That said, they are going to tee off on him at some point if the line can't hold up in pass blocking and if it can't run block.
Yeah, I do think he's a sturdy kid, so he's probably in some ways built for some of the punishment he's going to take this year. But I also think if they were a really good team, like a well-rounded offense, that he might be okay and be a quarterback that could have a really good year. And you do wonder, is he, and we'll find this out, is he the type of kid who can, when a lot is on his shoulders, carry them? What's going to be the running back situation? The whole running game is interesting because obviously they go with Connor Hayward, which is kind of a bizarre thought. Now, obviously, he's impressed during camp, and we've seen that sort of thing rewarded too. But it was very clear last year that Elijah Collins was the better running back. That wasn't a question, really. But Elijah Collins didn't look good. He looked slower than he did before. He didn't look like he was hitting the hole hard. I'd kind of heard some whispers that the running backs had not looked great. And then you get Jordan Simmons, a freshman, who obviously is a strong runner. He runs hard. I'm not sure his eyes are open, but he's
got speed.
What's that?
He's got speed to the edge, which you did.
And he provides some value. He probably is good. I think he's going to be a good player for them. But that run game situation was a little bizarre. And the thing about going with the Connor Hayward is, I think Hayward's a decent player. Again, in a perfect situation, he may be a good back. But at MSU, based on the offensive line that they have in place, you need guys who can make a little something out of not a whole lot. And he has not shown himself to be that guy. And they're going to have to find that guy if they're going to get anything out of this run game. I mean, they got, you look at, and I know Iowa lost today, but you go Michigan, Iowa back to back, and I think that, boy, I don't know how they get a push with unless look, Schiano's a good coach, and the thing I wanted to mention, I forgot earlier. We were talking. I'm getting a lot of people saying, "Well, Schiano's first game too." He got a recruiting class, including a handful of transfers from big schools that were playing today.
Yes,
and there's a little difference in his run up than Mel Tucker's run up, and I'm not saying they look better in some ways, not better in others. Stat-wise, they didn't turn the ball over as much. Schiano's a good coach, but I don't think it's entirely fair to compare their 2 run-ups to their years that they've had.
Yeah, and, from a perception standpoint, when you lose to a team that hasn't won a Big Ten game in 3 seasons, I mean, they went 2 winless seasons, 21 straight games without winning a Big Ten game. From a perception standpoint, as bad as the start to the game was, that is just as bad. But there were, I thought, a few things in there that, with the Reed situation, I thought Lombardi threw it around. And I thought the defense, after some real tough stretches in short field, for only having a month of install on a new defense. I mean, you can talk it in a Zoom meeting like this all you want, but until those guys are out there on the field running, in particular, what Xavier Henderson said is, previously under D'Antonio's defense, they tried to funnel things away from the middle towards the sidelines. Now you're basically flipping that around with this 4-2-5 and trying to get things funneled to the middle. That's a big change. I mean, that's a change that you got to watch the tape back to really see just who was out of position and who wasn't.
I'm curious to go watch the game again too, because I did think in the second half the defense came out and found itself a little bit. They weren't working with the short fields. I think the coaches did them some help bringing some extra pressure, and they felt, I think they were a little more disruptive, and so I thought the defense there were some adjustments and they looked a little better in the second half. Now, as we're doing this, Michigan has already put up like 35 points on Minnesota, and I know Minnesota's shorthanded. What's that?
At halftime.
Yeah. So this is going to get real quick. And, Mel Tucker is, if you think he's being judged right now, how things go against Michigan. I will say, one of the things that I think people should be very careful of in their language that I've seen tonight that's a little bothersome is there are some real, even when I don't know if people are doing it intentionally, racial undertones to the things they're saying about him occasionally. And that's, it's the career assistant line, which you never hear about a white guy. It's the just a recruiter. It's the, comparisons to Bobby Williams. Why not pick John L. Smith? Like, where does that come from? And
I did see one person say Bobby L. Williams or Bobby.
That is fair. That's fair if you're unhappy. But so I just do think that, he deserved. I mean, look, it was a brutal game, Chris, right? This went about as poorly as it could possibly go. And within this game, it's fair to criticize it. Like, I think that's one thing. Like, it is fair to say, hey, that going for it when they're, it's 4th and 3 and you're down 8 and you can get within a score easily like that, and you're not converting a lot of those. Like, I don't like that decision. Take the points. That's a fair criticism. But I think it's unfair after one game to say this guy was the wrong hire for the job. He was never a good. What are you talking about? It's one game. Now, it was not a great start, but this is a weird year anyway. Let's at least let the man play out the year. See what this team looks like as they play together week after week after week, and give the man a chance to do the job he was hired to do.
Let's walk through that circumstance too. I mean, I don't want to drag this out too much, but that's in particular, they're down 8 in the third quarter and 4 straight run plays. Now, I as much as that 4th down call was curious, the 4 straight run plays on top of it, when you've already been struggling to run the ball, one of two things. One, you're either trying to say we are going to impose our will and show what we want to be at some point, or someone just took the headset off and put it on autopilot because nobody was fooled by the 4th run on 4th and 1.
That was weird. Yeah. And what's weird is, and he had something after the game where he just said, we want to dictate something like we want to dictate when we want to run the ball. And when we can't do that, that's a problem for us. Like, for us to be successful, that's going to be a problem in the short term, because they're not going to dictate the run on anybody, it doesn't look like. And so I think they have to also adjust to the talent they have. Their strength is in those receivers. And I don't know what Mosley's condition will be, but they still got 2 pretty good guys. And, a guy who I thought was helpful and useful today that they're going to rely on, Matt Dotson, looked good coming back. He had 4 catches. Again, I thought Gillison might be a part of things. I guess not. But I think adjusting to what your personnel is that gives you a chance to win is something we're going to see how much they do.
Well, they always say, and Mel Tucker said it after the game, that the biggest growth is between week 1 and week 2 for teams. He's got a lot of growing to do in a very quick, short order, because Michigan at Ann Arbor for the 2nd straight year is up next week. We're going to have a lot more at lsj.com, greenandwhite.com, and freep.com. For Graham, it's Chris Solari. Thanks for watching.